Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about my favorite movie of all time, Jaws. So sit back and let's reminisce. Before we begin, let me tell you a little bit about Jaws. It was directed by Steven Spielberg. It has grossed $472 million since it debuted on June 16, 1975. The story is about a great white shark that terrorizes a New England town. It stars Roy Scheider, who plays the local cop, with the help of an oceanographer, Richard Dreyfuss, who hires Robert Shaw, the local fisherman, to hunt the beast. For some, it is known as a horror film, frightening people from ever going into the water ever again. For some, it's a gripping drama, with great actors, story, and directing. For many, it's an amazing adventure, a monster movie that puts you on the edge of your seat. It's beloved by many, and this is why I love Jaws. One of my first memories I had as a young child was that my father was an oyster fisherman. He would hire a crew of men and take them out on the southern lakes of Louisiana that connected to the Gulf of Mexico and dredge the bottom of the lake for oysters. I would join them on many of these ventures, not as a workman, but as a child, wanting to be with his father as he worked on his boat full of sailors. Summer of '75, I started paying attention to the news reports of a film called Jaws. I checked our local newspaper to see if the movie was playing nearby. There was talk of how people would line up around the block and wait for 2 hours to be let into the theater to watch it. I figured out it was playing at the Downtown Joy on Canal Street in New Orleans, and convinced my father to take me to see this movie about a fisherman catching a big fish. Arriving to the theater, one of the things I noticed right away was this bright blue poster of a shark aiming for a swimmer that could have looked like one of my older sisters. Then we were ushered to our seats.
Is it true that most people get attacked by sharks in 3 feet of water, about 10 feet from the beach?
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
The lights came on, and I was mesmerized by what I have just seen. There was 3 men who reminded me of my father and his crew, and it made such an impression on my 6-year-old soul. Coming out of the lobby, people was everywhere, waiting for their chance to go sit in the auditorium. I noticed behind the counter was a Jaws t-shirt. Oh, how I begged my father for that shirt, but sales have been so abundant that the shirts were sold out. Days later, an aunt of mine was upset that my father took me to see Jaws, when Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs was also playing in local theaters. But she wasn't aware my mother took me to see it before watching Jaws, and so that was my rite of passage into manhood. A neighborhood friend bewildered me with his paperback novel, The Jaws Log. It contained the making of Jaws and behind-the-scene photos of the mechanical shark. A couple of years later, he gave me his copy, knowing how much I was still fascinated and loved the movie. I finally got my own paperback novel of Jaws, written by Peter Benchley, and started reading it. But by the time it got to the 3rd or 4th chapter, it was different than the movie, and I lost interest of what it contained. Being an impressionable child, I told my father I wanted to seal up my brother's bedroom like an aquarium so I can have my own real live shark, when in actuality I wanted my own Bruce, the name Steven Spielberg gave the shark while filming the movie. By the end of summer, I must have seen Jaws like 4 or 5 times in different theaters around New Orleans metropolitan area. I was an artistic child. I liked to draw, especially the poster of Jaws and the shark. While in school, one of the kids who have seen what I've drawn took my artwork and added the correct anatomy of the swimmer and got me in trouble with the teacher. Regardless of my innocence, it was my first lesson that mischievous kids were untrustworthy. John Williams' score for the movie has become synonymous. There's nowhere in the world where you could go and not hear the sound of dun 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 without thinking of Jaws. My parents bought the soundtrack and I would listen to it over and over again. Towards the end of the year, Jaws mania was everywhere. On the radio, there was a novelty record called Mr. Jaws that parodied the movie.
We are here on the beach where a giant shark has just eaten a girl swimmer. Well, Mr. Jaws, how was it? Dynamite! And what did she say when you grabbed her?
Please, Mr. Please.
Mad Magazine had their own writers and illustrators come up with their own parody of Jaws called Jawed, and I had that copy too. At the end of the year for Christmas, Santa Claus gave me the Jaws game. And by my surprise, a neighborhood friend, Jimmy, gave me a record called Jaws of the Shark. Early 1976, Jaws was nominated by the Oscars. It was my first time witnessing this event. Being 7 years old and following all things Jaws, I knew it would win all categories. But by the end of the evening, I couldn't comprehend how it had won Best Soundtrack and Editing, but not Best Picture, or why Steven Spielberg wasn't even nominated. Summer of '76 came along another Jaws movie, but not a sequel, a knockoff called Jaws of Death. Instead of being great white sharks, it was mako sharks. The lead character was a shark whisperer who had a necklace to protect him from their bite. I kept waiting for the story to have the same thrills as Jaws. However, I did eventually find my own shark tooth necklace. Kids in school kept telling me there was a cartoon called Jabberjaw, but I couldn't find it every time I turned on the TV on Saturday mornings. So instead, I kept looking for Jaws in the movie theaters. Every summer in New Orleans, I would look forward for Jaws to be re-released, or I would end up going to the local amusement park, Pontchartrain Beach. I won my first rubber shark playing their midway games. May 1977 delivered another motion picture event, Star Wars. Star Wars eventually dethroned Jaws as the #1 movie at that time. I'm a fan of Star Wars, but we will discuss that in another video. Summer of '77 also brought another Peter Benchley novel to the big screen, The Deep, starring Robert Shaw, who also played in Jaws, and Lou Gossett Jr., who would finally show up later in the franchise, starring in Jaws 3. The Deep was an average thriller, but still couldn't compare to Jaws. Flipping through the newspaper, columnist Rona Barrett said Universal is heading back to the sea with a sequel to Jaws. What excited me was that it was being filmed about 4.5 hours from New Orleans at Navarre Beach, Florida. If I could have drove as a kid, I would have definitely tried to go find where they were filming it. Steven Spielberg wasn't involved with the sequel. He and Richard Dreyfuss was filming Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Spring of 1978, the tabloid magazine Star had behind-the-scene photos of the making of Jaws 2. They had photos of the fin and people on sailboats. It definitely whet my appetite for what will come. In a little supermarket near my house, in the bin with other paperback novels, I finally seen the image of Jaws 2. The artwork for the shark looks slightly different, but I definitely bought the novel. The first week of June 78, my father and I was visiting his friends out in Metairie, Louisiana. When we're finished, we're driving down Veterans Highway and we saw Lakeside Theater had a long line in front of it. So we decided to stop and see what was going on. Lo and behold, Jaws 2 was having a premiere before anyone else could see it, but it was sold out. Obviously, I was disappointed, but come June 16th, the movie finally opened, and I was there the first day to see the sequel to my favorite movie. Jaws 2 was an exciting sequel. It didn't have the accolades that Jaws had, but I enjoyed it nevertheless, especially the music by John Williams. The score delivered like any John Williams works does. While out shopping with my brother and his friend Drew couldn't understand why I was buying the album if none of the songs sung words. This period in my life started my geek obsession of collecting memorabilia from the movies I've seen and liked. Not only did I buy the album, but I found only one copy of the Jaws 2 log novel on the shelf of a local department store, and I held on to it for life. Then there was t-shirts, 3 different styles of Jaws 2 iron-ons that made it into my collection, and I wore them proudly. And baseball cards. Did you ask if I collected baseball cards? No. I had Jaws 2 bubblegum cards that I collected. Of course, Mad Magazine had their laugh once again with Jawed 2. Anything I seen with the Jaws image on it, I wanted. On November 4th, 1979, Jaws debuted on the ABC Sunday Night Movie. To an audience of 80 million, shattering records again. This time around, after watching, I came aware that something was amiss, for they added deleted scenes back into the movie. As I patiently went on with life, I kept my eye out for Jaws experiences. Spring of '82, a low-budget movie suddenly appeared at my local cinema called Great White. I went to see it opening night, and by the following week, it was pulled from theaters because Universal sued the makers of Great White for plagiarism. Once again in 1982, while skimming the newspaper, I came across an article saying Universal was making Jaws 3, being filmed in 3D. But to my delightment, it was shooting at SeaWorld in Orlando, Florida. My family would go almost annually to Disney World, and I kept my fingers crossed that I would be able to visit while filming. What I didn't know till many years later, that during this period, the producers of the first 2 Jaws films, Richard Zanuck and David Brown, approached Universal about making Jaws 3 a comedy called Jaws 3 People Zero. They hired National Lampoon's writer John Hughes, who became well known in the mid-'80s for directing Molly Ringwald movies. They were aiming for tongue-in-cheek parody slant of all things that went wrong while making Jaws movies, but Universal refused.
A mindless eating machine that will attack and devour anything. 1.
Around the holiday season of Christmas 1982, I went to see a film called High Road to China, starring Tom Selleck and Bess Armstrong, who had a part in the upcoming Jaws 3. And guess what trailer came on the screen?
Continued the legend and spread the fear. Next summer, nature's most terrifying creature takes on an all-new dimension in an all-new adventure. And for the first time, the terror of Jaws will not stop at the edge of the screen. Jaws 3D. The third dimension is terror.
I enjoyed the trailer. There wasn't much to it, but from what it's shown, it had the very essence of the first two movies. I've seen Jaws 3D opening day, summer of 1983. The 3D was fun and things leaped off the screen as they should in a 3D film. However, the pacing of the film was tepid, and some of the CGI underwater scenes was really inadequate. I liked the cast, but the writers gave them some really absurd dialogue. By summer of 1987, I kept driving my girlfriend Maria nuts by constantly throwing around this phrase, "This time it's personal." She wasn't aware it was for Jaws the Revenge. The movie suffered a rushed production. The film felt like an average made-for-TV drama with some shark scenes added for effect. Over the years, I was always on the lookout for Bruce the Shark from Jaws. I have visited Universal Studios on both East and West Coast, and friends from all over the world associate me with sharks. For Mardi Gras, I got my family to dress up as Sheriff Brody, Quint, and I dressed up as Hooper. January of 2019, for my birthday, some family and friends took me to see Jaws in concert. But if you remember at the beginning of this story, I said I wanted my own Bruce. I want to thank Mike and Kathy Schutz of Shark City, Ozark for making this dream come true. Thanks for listening to my story about my Jaws memories. If you want to watch more of my channel, subscribe. Also, tell us what you like about Jaws in the comments. Bruce and I would like you to bounce on back. Jaws is available on Blu-ray 4K disc, and you can find them at these retail locations. You can also download them at these websites. Hit the subscribe link if you want to follow Kevin and his crew on more adventures. Want to know when we upload new videos? Then hit that notification link on YouTube. Give us a thumbs up. That will let us know if you like this video. Bounce on back.